And with that, I will hand things over to Tanya. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. Hi, everyone. I'm Tanya Isa. I'm a member of the board of Hudson Taconic Lands. Thank you all so much for being here tonight. This is the first installment of our winter speaker series, which runs through March. And for the next hour, we are going to learn about the sturgeon of the Hudson River with Amanda Higgs. Before we begin, we will acknowledge the land. It is with gratitude and humility that we acknowledge that we are learning, speaking, and gathering on the ancestral homelands of the Mohican people, who are the indigenous peoples of this land. Despite tremendous hardship in being forced from here, today their community resides in Wisconsin and is known as the Stockbridge-Muncie community. We pay honor and respect to their ancestors, past and present, as we commit to building a more inclusive and equitable space for all. Because of the tremendous community support, Hudson Taconic Lands has conserved over 18,000 acres in Rensselaer County and manages more than 20 public nature areas. This map shows all conserved lands in the county. The darker green shows HTL conserved lands, and the light green shows non-HTL parks and preserves. The red shows lands conserved by HTL in the past 5 years, some of which are the result of the Forests Forever campaign. It is now my distinct pleasure to introduce our speaker this evening, Amanda Higgs. Amanda has been working as a fisheries biologist on the Hudson River since 1999, working with sturgeon since 2000. She works with both Atlantic and short-nosed sturgeon. Since 2010, she has represented New York State on the technical committee of the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission, working with other East Coast states on sturgeon management. She manages the Hudson River Adult Atlantic Sturgeon Survey and the array of fish detection equipment that covers the river between New York Harbor and the Troy Dam. Amanda grew up in the Hudson Valley and has spent her entire life enjoying the Hudson River. Again, please put your questions in the chat for Amanda. And with that, I extend a very warm welcome and hand off to Amanda.
Thank you, Tanya. So as she said, I grew up in the Hudson Valley. I grew up on the Hudson River. So I love talking about the Hudson River's largest fish. So as she mentioned, I work collaboratively along the coast, and all of the projects I'm going to talk about are work that's been done with other people, other researchers and academia, state agencies. And a lot of the slides you're going to see tonight are actually donated by Shannon White, which is one of my collaborators. So I'm going to do a little bit of a different land acknowledgement. The Hudson River is known as the Mihikanatuck, which is the waters that are never still in the Mohegan language. The Hudson Valley is the ancestral homeland of the Munsee, the Lenape, and Mohegan people, who are indigenous peoples of this region. Despite hardship and being forced from here, the communities are in Wisconsin, Oklahoma, and Canada, and they continue to maintain strong connections to these lands and waters. I feel this is important. Sturgeon, particularly, was very important to the native people. You're going to see some slides later about why that was, the timing of the migration and stuff. And we still actually interact with the tribes with sturgeon. They have come to the Hudson, have helped us do sampling and stuff, so we still kind of maintain some interactions with them. So kind of a quick introduction to sturgeon. They're an ancient group of fish that are among the most endangered animals on the planet. We have two species of sturgeon in the Hudson: Atlantic sturgeon, which are the ones that get very large, up to 14 feet long and 800 pounds. And the much smaller cousin, which are the short nose, much smaller, gets to be only about 2 to 3 feet, gets to be about 14 pounds. They have a little bit different life histories. they're both migratory, but in a little bit different ways. Shortnose move around extensively within a home river. So the Hudson River shortnose population stays mostly in the Hudson. Uh, the Atlantic sturgeon, though, they use the river, but then move along the coast. Um, and that exposes them to threats across different large scales, um, both in the river and in the ocean. They're both very long-lived species, and they can live up to 60 years, and we're finding they're probably much, much older. And they can reach maturity. It takes many years for them to reach maturity. And unfortunately, these life history characteristics make them very vulnerable to overexploitation, so overfishing, and also because they're migratory threats along over broad areas. So if we look back into our written history of colonial America, sturgeons were extremely important and abundant, and they're a very important food source during times of our development of our country. Locally, in the Hudson Valley, they're an important part of native culture, which I mentioned in the land acknowledgement. So, as mentioned in the previous slide for Jamestown, the timing of the migration was in late spring when food resources were getting very low or completely exhausted. Atlantic sturgeon are large, so they provided lots of food for many people. And there are also other parts that could be used, like arrowheads. So they have a bony, uh, they have scutes that are on the outside, which are these bony plates that can be used. Um, Flesh for basket making. High Park, which is just north of Poughkeepsie, was and still is known for the abundance of sturgeon that are there during certain times of year. The in-river fishery operated in this area as well as in Havestraw and Catskill. So this is a fisherman's boat just before the fishery closed in the Hudson in 1996. The fishery was mostly for caviar, but they also did keep males that were, would smoke them. So they mostly targeted females, but they also did keep males. By the late 1800s, there was a intense industrial scale fishing effort that harvested huge numbers of fish. So the population was pretty large, and it decimated very quickly. And this was not only in the Hudson, but in other rivers along the coast. The Delaware followed kind of the same trajectory. Uh, so what happens is you have large numbers of fish, you overfish, uh, the population goes down, and there's many years where there's not a lot of fishing happening because there aren't many fish. And then once you get to even just a little bit of recovery, you start fishing hard again, and it knocks the populations down again. So they do continue at lower levels in the decades that follow. And in 1998, uh, the Coastwide Commission that manages the fisheries along the coast for lots of different species, and Atlantic sturgeon were included in that. They realized that the population was doing bad in 1998. They closed the fisheries coastwide. In 1996, it was closed in the Hudson. But even though it's closed, bycatch continues. So that's when people are fishing for something else and they catch sturgeon by mistake. So there's still uh, catch that happens by mistake, basically. So after some time, Atlantic sturgeon were listed as endangered. Shortnose have been endangered since the 1960s, and in 2012, Atlantic sturgeon were listed as endangered. So even with closure of targeted fisheries in 1998 and protection under Endangered Species Act, both species of sturgeon still face significant threats. And many populations really haven't shown any recovery. So you have habitat loss, fisheries bycatch, incidental mortality from things like ship strikes, dredging, marine construction. They all continue to impact sturgeon. And yet, even after all of that doom and gloom, the Hudson River is still home to sizable populations of both species, shortnose and Atlantics. And likely, and you're going to see in a little bit about shortnose, among the largest populations of both species anywhere on the planet. So it makes it kind of important for us to conserve these populations, but it also provides some great opportunities for us to learn more about the fish and develop tools and understanding that we can apply to other sturgeon species which are struggling along the coast and around the world. So, as I mentioned, all these projects are work. We work with collaborators, and we're working on very many different parts of sturgeon conservation and management, including genetics, movement, broad scale movement. But for today, we're going to share some of the efforts that we are doing to estimate abundance of both short-nosed Atlantics, and then touch on some research that we're doing with movement using acoustic telemetry to learn more about movement within the Hudson and then also along the coast. So, I want to start with the population estimates for both Atlantics and short-nose. So, why do we need population estimates? I mean, it gives us an idea how we're doing. Are things better or worse than they were before? Are we making any progress? And as a group, sturgeon are really not very easy to sample. So, as an endangered fish, there's not many. Uh, for adults, they're in the river for short periods of time in specific areas. A 14-foot fish is not always easy to handle. But because they're federally endangered, some of the traditional methods that you would do, so you catch a lot of fish and mark them with tags and then recapture them, don't work because we're limited in the number of fish that we can handle annually since they're endangered. So our adult spawning run estimate for Atlantic sturgeon. So along the coast, a lot of people are trying to learn more about use of areas, use of rivers. We implant, which you'll see a picture of on the next slide, implant fish with acoustic telemetry tags. So we surgically implant them. So we put them in and then sew them up and then follow the fish around. Some of the tags now last for 10 years, which is a lot of data. So you get to follow a fish in the river and along the coast for 10 years. A lot of the fish that use the Hudson are tagged along the coast, and they come into the Hudson to spawn. There's another newer technology that is being used. It's becoming cheaper. It's called side scan sonar. I'm going to show you some images on some following slides, but it allows us to collect all this data in images and then count fish. And if you combine the two, you can, in some really fancy math that is not what I do, you can get some estimates of population. So I'm going to step through the process in these next slides. So this is a picture of a fish getting a tag in a short-nosed sturgeon up near Albany. So talking through the approach a little bit more detail, there's a network of hydrophones on the Hudson. So Tanya mentioned that I manage this hydrophone network. So they're receivers. They're listening all the time for fish, and when a fish swims by, it gets a date and time. I kind of joke around that it's like easy pass for sturgeon. So each one of the dots on the screen on the right is a receiver. So we have receivers, like Tanya mentioned, from New York Harbor all the way up to the Troy Dam. So we can use this network to track the migration of an individually tagged fish. And then you count the total number of tags that move upstream. So in this case, we understand that fish move into the Hudson, and when they move above the Bear Mountain Bridge, we consider them on a spawning run. So in the bottom part of the image, you have the white dots. When they move into the gray dots, that's above the Bear Mountain. We assume fish that move into the gray dots are on a spawning run. So we know how many fish move north of Bear Mountain. And then you can count the total number of fish that move upstream in a given year. And then you go out and you use side scan sonar to count the total number of fish. So you can't tell if a fish is tagged, so you're going to count both tagged and untagged individuals in the High Park Reach during 12 days spread across the whole spawning season. So the red dots is the High Park Reach, so it's a relatively small portion of the river, and they're known to aggregate in this area, likely due to available spawning habitat in that area. So this is a side scan image. Like I said before, the sturgeon are like really the perfect animal for side scan. They have that hard outside bony scutes, makes them very reflective. So side scan is like shining a flashlight in the bottom of the river. You get reflective image back of the fish, and then you get an acoustic shadow that's associated with it. So you tow the image that's at the bottom of the screen, the edge tech. You tow the I'm sorry, the side scan up and down the river in these parallel transects, and you get all these images of fish on the bottom, and you can go through and count them. And so then you have the total number of fish that are in the area during that day that you're sampling. And as you're sampling using this side scan unit, you listen for tagged fish. So you have a number of tagged fish in the area, and then you have the total number of fish that you image with this equipment. So the math gets really complicated here, but this is kind of generally how it goes, and this is about my understanding of it. So when you're side scanning, you hear 10 tagged fish, and you identify 100 targets. So you count 100 fish while you're doing your sampling. So that gives you a proportion of tagged fish in the area. So you then extrapolate that to the whole river. So you know that 150 fish moved above Bear Mountain. So those fish were then on in the spawning area potentially, and 10% of them are tagged. You get a spawning run estimate of 1,500 fish, and this is hypothetical. This is not the real number for the Hudson. But in 2014, we did kind of what I just mentioned, and we got a population estimate of 466 fish that returned that one year in 2014 to the Hudson River. So this suggests that the Hudson supports one of the larger populations of this species, although we do need population estimates for other rivers to be able to say this more confidently. However, the spawning run of the Hudson is still very much smaller than it was prior to that exploitation that I talked about earlier in the late 1800s. And it really hasn't grown much since we closed the commercial fishery in 1996. So the estimate is from 2014. We just completed another estimate from 23, 24, and 25 that hopefully in the next couple of years we'll have new population estimates for the Hudson River. They are looking to be a little larger, but time will tell once the models and everything are run.
Amanda, we have
So,
a question that came in.
sure.
The question is, what is the food source for the sturgeon, and what depth do they spend most of their time at?
So they eat very small things in the bottom of the river, like worms, crustaceans. They do eat fish, but the majority of stuff is in the mud on the bottom of the river. And so if you're ever on the river in the High Park area in the month of June, you might see fish breaching, so jumping. So they spend their time throughout the entire water column, and they will jump completely out of the water. Um, and one of the thoughts is they're jumping to gulp air. They have a very primitive swim bladder, so be able to uh, like so they can figure out where they are in the water column. They need to have air. Um, so that's how they get it. And a lot of fish can absorb it through the water. These guys need to gulp it, and then they can yeah they can move out up and down in the water column.
Thanks.
So we have two surveys that we run in the Hudson to kind of track populations. I'm not sure there's any other river along the coast that has both a juvenile and Atlantic survey that tracks populations. In the Hudson, we do. So the juvenile survey has been going on since 2004. And one of the kind of questions we were asking ourselves is we catch fish So fish are born in the Hudson. They stay for 3 to 5 years. They leave. The fish that we catch are about that age, uh, based on the stuff that we know. So are we actually tracking the Hudson River population or a population that's combined with the Delaware River? Uh, just because of the age of the fish, it could be coming from other rivers. And it's not well documented when fish move in and out of rivers. So, working with colleagues from USGS, they've developed a genetic baseline for all of the rivers along the coast. And when we catch the fish, we just take a little piece of the fin and we can uh, determine what river of origin the fish was born. So, we caught a bunch of fish in the Hudson. We genetically assigned them to rivers. And I'm going to talk about this with Atlantic adult Atlantics later on. It's the same. You use the genetic baseline, take a fin clip. So the results of this. So I'm going to walk you through the little graph on the left-hand side. It's just length on the bottom. So you can see we catch fish that are between 500 and 800 millimeters, which are like 3 to 5 year olds. And on the x-axis, you have the assignment score. So if it's 1, it means it assigns to the Hudson 100%. And as you get down, the assignment score, is getting further and further from assigning to the Hudson. So you can see that the majority of the fish that we capture assign to the Hudson. So that means that what we're tracking in our juvenile survey is what's happening and indicative of the local population, the Hudson River population. So that's good. So that means that we're tracking actually what's happening in our population. So the Hudson River, sturgeon are doing okay, but we know that these fish continue to be vulnerable, and more work is really necessary to help secure their future. So from a science perspective, there's some outstanding questions we'd like to work on. What's needed for recovery? What's the recipe for success? In our adult survey we conduct on the river, and you're going to see a little video later, we rarely capture females. We'll catch, 5 females to 200 males. Why is that? Is that something we should be concerned about? We don't know the answers to those. Uh, where does sturgeon run into danger? Like, where are the threats? When and where? How might those threats change over time? These are kind of critical questions to help support recovery efforts. And one of the things is, we can protect them when they're in the ocean, but we don't even know where they're moving along the coast. And there's still so much to learn about movement patterns. So this is a couple projects I'm going to talk about engaging kind of in some coast-wide collaborative work to help better understand migration patterns. So we tagged fish with satellite tags, and we also have this coast-wide database of detections, which is kind of a wealth of data that we haven't fully explored. Movement and vulnerability along the coast is mostly unknown. So I'm going to show some results from these couple projects that look at the marine migrations with satellite tags, and then this receiver database that we're kind of getting into with detections from lots of researchers. So long time ago, we tagged 25 Atlantic sturgeon. From they were in the Hudson River, so we kind of assume, that they're Hudson River origin fish based on the stuff I told you with the genetic baseline and all of that stuff. So tags store data with about movement, and then it's scheduled to pop off when we tell it to. And tags comes to the surface, and then it transmits all of its data to us. So we asked the tag to stay on for up to a year. So we picked different times just to learn more. Obviously, the more time it's on the fish, the chances of getting the data back are a little less. So you may have seen tags like the one that's in the middle of the screen. They usually use them a lot on mostly fish that use marine environments. It works best. The tag needs salt water to kind of corrode and pop off. So it uses the angle of light to determine latitude and records depth and temperature and helps us kind of get estimates where they are along the coast. The East Coast is kind of nice because it runs pretty much north-south. So it gives you a pretty good idea, it's a little easier for you to estimate locations. So the white circles with the black dots inside are the estimated locations of where the fish were at certain times of year. And the stars are where the tag reported to pop off. So one didn't even make it out of the Hudson River. The tag sends all of its data via satellite, and it comes right to my email, and it prioritizes data from early and late, and it so it doesn't start at the beginning and go to the end. So you get pictures of where they were throughout the time that the tag was attached, and for the most part, the fish stayed close to shore and spent time off the south shore of Long Island, off the coast of New Jersey, the mouth of Delaware Bay, and the mouth of Chesapeake Bay. So like most science, you have your outliers. So you have the majority of your fish stay within the mid-Atlantic bight, and then one went to the South Carolina Georgia border, coast of North Carolina, and then one way up into the Bay of Fundy. The five remaining tags didn't function properly, which is pretty normal for those tags. Um, so we start to learn a little bit more about where our fish hang out, the ones that are from the Hudson. So I've been kind of tangentially involved in this. I provided detection data from the Hudson, but working with colleagues throughout the East Coast. So these are all of the institutions that contributed data. It was telemetry detections for almost 2,700 Atlantic sturgeon that were tagged and data collected from 2007 to 2021. The individuals produced over 32 million detections in freshwater, estuarine, and marine environments. And we genetically signed to river of origin for most of the fish and also determined sex using that same piece of flesh. Um, there's obviously a lot of data here, and some analysis have been started to kind of look at ocean migrations of Atlantic sturgeon. So because the Hudson has such a large population, a large number of fish use the river, and we also have this extensive array, uh, the first place that they started doing analysis and looking were in the Hudson River. So as I'm talking here, a fish that was born in the Hudson is going to be described as a fish that's natal to the Hudson River. The fish that uses the Hudson but genetically assigns to somewhere else like the Delaware is called the non-natal fish. The published literature was always that fish that were born in the Hudson return to the Hudson to spawn. And this large-scale project is finding that that's probably not the case for the fish, and some straying happens, which is not out of the realm. It happens a lot in other species of fish. Um, we also found that these non-natal fish use the river very similarly than a natal fish would use. So a fish that moves into the Hudson that assigns to the Delaware goes above the Bear Mountain Bridge and goes to the spawning area. Um, so to kind of dive more deeply into that, they decided to look at use of natal and non-natal fish in two rivers, the Hudson and the Delaware. So these are going to be some of the information that we found, kind of like a large scale. So Hudson River that are natal, Atlantic sturgeon that are natal to the Hudson River were detected all throughout the coast, from Maine to Florida. So our Hudson fish move into many rivers. And the thing that is important to me, the takeaway, is that other states along the coast do not afford the same protections that New York does for our fish. So they congregate in Chesapeake and Delaware Bays for long periods of time. Uh, Fish from other rivers use the Hudson, and they're detected north of the Bear Mountain. Goes from rivers from north to south, so fish from the Savannah, the Edisto, the Roanoke, tributaries of the James River, which is in the Chesapeake, the Delaware, Connecticut, and the Kennebec in Maine. So we now are not only protecting our own fish, we're protecting fish from other river systems. And for populations like the Delaware, the population is pretty low. And we have to just remember that we're not only protecting our fish, but we're protecting fish from other states. Some new analysis that had like this manuscript was submitted less than a week ago. Discusses movement and use of the river by Atlantic sturgeon. So using those same tagged fish, we monitored their movement in and out of the river for about 10 years. We had fish from Virginia, South Carolina that moved into the Hudson. So the traditional movement and published information was that fish spawn April to June. They leave pretty soon after they spawn. But this manuscript highlights that there are a lot of fish that stay later into the fall and into the winter, pretty far into the Hudson. And that if they do that one time, the behavior is repeated. So if you're a traditional fish that move in and leave in June, that's usually what you do. If you're a fish that stays later into the fall, that's what you do. So protection of habitats and areas that fish use is based on that previous literature of like that traditional movement. And we now have to either expand, modify, make new rules about protections so it can protect all of the fish and not just the ones that are here to spawn in that traditional time frame. Excuse me. So kind of shifting gears, we have a lot of fish. Oops, sorry. Moved on to the next one. We have a lot of fish in the Hudson, but we also have fish from lots of other places. So we need to protect what the fish need to recover. So is that habitat for successful spawning, egg survival, what young fish need to grow, and protect the areas when they're there. In all honesty, working with people along the coast, New York has some pretty good laws to protect habitat, sturgeon in general. So habitat to the state is not only just the bottom of the river, but it's water temperature. So making sure the water temperature is right, the salinity is right, the turbidity, which is like how muddy things are, and then access to that habitat. Like you can make sure the bottom is protected, but if they can't get there, then it doesn't matter. So contractors can only work within small like windows for in-river work, and even disturbance to habitat, they need to mitigate it by either building new habitat or working with the state to conduct a project to learn more about the species. I'm going to show some more side scan images, like the one I showed back when I was talking more about the estimate for sturgeon. But in this image, you can see the sturgeon targets are all numbered. So there's 18 of them in this image, and you can also see how side scan you can map the bottom and how the different habitats. You have the rocky outcroppings, sand, gravels, and boulders. So the area that you just saw is in that reddy purpley box, which is near the Poughkeepsie Yacht Club, which is known habitat. We've collected eggs in that area. It's known spawning habitat for Atlantic sturgeon. So they need hard rock substrate, bedrock for spawning. Fish are found throughout this reach that is on the map here, and this is where we conduct our Atlantic survey, which is similar to the index of abundance that I told you about for juveniles. We do this for Atlantics as well. Um, so in this area, we have these sand waves. I'm going to show you a little picture of them later, but you can see there's these like bumps on the bottom. So in that previous picture I showed you was numbered 18 fish. This one has, I see 32. A lot of fish, right? And this is not spawning area. This is these like sandy bottom. Why are the fish here? We have no idea. We catch them here all the time in nets. and we see fish with the side scan in this area a lot. Uh, so it's important that we protect this area for whatever reason it is for fish. So here's another image of these sand dunes. So the sand waves are 10 to 12 feet tall, and they're dynamic, meaning that they move over time. So the net flow of the river is south, and these waves move over time uh, south. So one of the good things is that New York now knows these are important. We find fish here. They will protect them when the fish are in the river and also just protect them in general. Like, so the fish need them. We're not going to let someone go through and, dredge this area because they obviously like to use these sand waves. Um, so just quick on the sand waves, we see fish in them it looks like they seem like they are using it to get out of the current. So maybe to rest. And so before I switch over to short nose, I want to kind of end on an interesting note for people that live in the Hudson Valley may have seen this. It was in 2019. Um, they imaged a sturgeon that was 4 meters in length, which is over 14 feet long, which would be probably about 800 pounds. It was in the High Park Reach. Uh, we hadn't ever really observed a fish this big. So in historic records, they would always say they got that big, but we assume that they didn't really exist anymore. We can safe to assume this fish was really old. And it's to me, it's pretty amazing that we still have fish out there that have survived, commercial fisheries, um, the gauntlet of moving through New York Harbor and the vessels and logged tens of thousands of miles swimming up and down the coast. And it's kind of beat the odds, right? It's seen a lot. It's probably, really old fish. And it really kind of highlights that there's still so much left to discover about, migrations in the marine environment. And there's still really cool things. These fish are really cool and they're still out there. So giant prehistoric fish are some of like the natural wonders that make our world such an interesting place. So if is there any like Atlantic sturgeon questions that I can maybe answer as before we move on to short nose?
How old do they get?
That's a really great question. So we used to age them using a piece of their fin ray, but we're realizing that that's really underestimating their age. So uh, very old. So we say 60. I feel like that's really underestimating. It could be hundreds. We don't really know at this point. We're trying some new techniques actually this coming year to see if we can try to figure out how old they get.
Are there any natural predators?
Humans, I think.
Well,
No, natural ones. I think once they get pretty big, I think there's really not much. Maybe like sharks, but I don't. Yeah, there's not many natural predators.
We have another question in the chat. Is there any data on how sturgeon fare after being accidentally caught?
We are looking into that. So I think it depends a lot on how they're caught and how long they're caught for. So if they're caught in a net for a long period of time, I don't think a lot of them make it. They may swim off, but they don't live. But we're working with fishermen and with researchers along the coast to learn more about that, trying to get a handle on bycatch mortality.
What should a person do if they accidentally catch a sturgeon?
On a rod and reel, release it as fast as possible. It happens, and we understand it happens. It's just to try to get it, not to remove it from the water and release it as quickly as you can.
As non-teleost fish, does their unique anatomy make them especially vulnerable?
Vulnerable to, was there more to that question or no?
That was the question.
Maybe the person could give me a little, I'm not sure if, yeah, if there was more to that.
Yeah, maybe we could get some. How far up the Hudson do they migrate? Do they go past Albany?
So we have detections at the dam, the Troy
Okay.
Dam.
Yep.
Uh, we have not gotten any detections above the dam. They would have to go through the lock.
Right. Are there scoots only along their back, or are they along the spiny sides too?
So you can see in the short nose picture here. Can you see my cursor on the screen?
Yep.
So short nose have their 5 rows. So they have one along the back, one along the side, and then one along their belly. So this is 1, 2, 3, and then on the other side they have these bottom ones and these side ones. So there's 5 rows of scoots. And the Atlantics, short nose, I think, don't have these as much, but they also have kind of little scoots all throughout their skin, which make their outside a little bit harder than a short nose is a little softer on their skin.
Amanda, we have a little more detail on that earlier question. As non-teleost fish, does their unique anatomy make them especially vulnerable to environmental pressures or
So I think because they're kind of an ancient fish, I think they're a little bit more like more resistant to some like lower DO and stuff, but they're I think they have a little bit more, they've made it through so much that other fish have, not lived through. And then they can uh adjust and evolve over time, but I mean they are, I'd say, semi-vulnerable. I would say a little less than Teleos fish.
Are
and then
indigenous, excuse me, are indigenous people allowed to fish them?
Not Atlantic and short nose. They are able to fish for them for Lake Sturgeon in other parts of our state, New York State.
are there fish that are in the same family or closely related to sturgeon?
I don't know. So, sharks are not that. I don't know if they're in the same family, but there's like paddlefish that are in New York State that are closely related to sturgeons. Um, so there are fish that are closely related to fish that are still alive and well on this planet.
All right, that takes care of the questions in the chat.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep. So I'll keep going. So we're gonna move to transition to short nose, which is, the smaller species that mostly stay in the Hudson and don't make those long migrations along the coast. So, as a reminder, they spend, their whole life migrating within the Hudson, and they do some marine migrations, but for the most part, they stay within the Hudson, and those marine migrations are not the norm. So in the late 1970s, Bill Dovell estimated the population to be about 15,000 fish. In the 1990s, Mark Bain estimated 60,000 fish. So the population had grown by 400% in a pretty short amount of time. So they're both using those traditional mark recapture methods that I mentioned. So you have to capture a lot of fish, mark them with tags, and then recapture. And that's kind of how the model works. So in 2020, 2021, we started and kind of embarked on a new population estimate to see if the population had continued to grow or if things had changed. So we used the similar method that I talked about before. We acoustically tagged fish. We side scanned in a small area. This time we used an overwintering area, which is near the Esopus Lighthouse, which is north of Hyde Park and south of Kingston. So using the same kind of simplified math that I showed you, you look at the proportion of tagged fish, and then kind of looking river wide, you can come up with an estimate, a hypothetical estimate of run size. So when we side scanned in this small area near the Esopus Lighthouse, which is an overwintering area, we found that the fish congregate pretty tightly in this area. So each of those yellow smears on the screen is a fish. So you can see the orange, the yellow circles are the fish are literally on top of each other. So we would go out for a couple hours and we would collect data, and it would take us like 4 days to process the data. It was very time consuming and difficult, right? So it's really hard. On that image, you see that there's 458 short nose. It's very hard to count. So you have the Atlantic sturgeon, they're much larger also, but also not usually so stacked on top of each other. So you could see this one image was just less than 1% of the images that was collected in just one day. And the whole day, the images collected weren't like this. The fish were congregated in these small areas, and then there'd be large expanses with no fish in them. So a technician, we have, temporary technicians that, come on for short periods of time. And he started and he said, he's freshly out of college. He says, why don't you guys use like AI or machine learning to count these fish? And I was like, well, we have talked about it, right? But we're all old and none of us have time to do it. And he's like, can I do it? And I was like, absolutely. So he, in a pretty short time, developed a program to count fish based on size, shape, and color. And the processing of the data, including the post-processing, took a couple hours instead of multiple days, using Adam's pipeline. So our new population estimate is now 72, 589. Adam's method that was created, he's going to hopefully publish a manuscript. It created this new pipeline that can be used for not only the work we do in the Hudson, but for other populations along the coast for sturgeon, but also for other species. There's lots of species, and this, is a relatively new side scan is a relatively new like method of doing this, and it's becoming cheaper and cheaper all the time. So we kind of to talk about how it compares to 1997. The overall abundance, if you were to look, is that has a 59% chance that the population is larger than it was in the previous estimate. And by this estimate of 72,589, the short nose population in the Hudson River is the largest sturgeon population on the planet. So now we have all these fish that were tagged with tags that last for 10 years. So now we have all of this data that we can follow the fish for 10 years. So it's always been known that fish use New York Harbor, short nose in particular. We didn't know how long they stay there, um, what areas they use. Obviously fish that come in from the ocean need to go through New York Harbor. So Atlantic sturgeon use it, but in a much different way. They're, moving into the river and staying there for very short periods of time. Population of short nose doesn't leave the river and can potentially stay there for long periods of time. So we started to kind of look more into understanding the use of the harbor. So we currently had not, or like historically had not really maintained receivers in the harbor. If anyone's ever been in the harbor, the vessel traffic, it just is not the most nice place to work. But to learn more about use of the river and the harbor, we needed to kind of suck it up and put some receivers down there. So we had tagged 84 fish for that short nose population estimate project, and you can see it's pretty skewed towards males. We had a hard time catching females, so we tagged more males than females. We started with these 7 acoustic receivers, and for this project, that's what we had, but we have expanded our array in New York Harbor and have more receivers now to try to learn more about use of the harbor. And really just looking at departure and arrival times. When are they there and for how long? So to kind of get you oriented to this plot, we're going to talk about this plot a little bit. In the red, in the middle here is the higher proportions of fish, and the dark purple is there's no data, so there's no detections. So we tagged the fish, and 30% of the tagged fish went to near Carver, which was completely not what we expected. That's a lot of fish. Um, and I point out, I mentioned that it was skewed towards males when we tagged, and that it was in pretty equal sex ratio of males and females that went to near Carver. So on average, more females go than males. So most of the fish migrated to the harbor in mid-May. So a lot of them spawned up in Albany, and within 5 days, were in Newark Harbor, and they stayed until mid-June. There was a fall migration of fish, so they would move back into the Hudson, and then come back down in October and stay for a period of time, like through November. And then there was this overwintering fish. So the fall migrants would occasionally stay and overwinter in the harbor until the following June. So now they arrive in October and they don't leave until June. That's like a long period of time that the fish are hanging out near Carver. So to kind of,
Amanda, there was a question about population sampling in Troy,
Mhm,
below the Troy Dam.
mhm.
Mark commented there are large concentrations of them there. He's seen many of them caught, and caught one himself that was 3.5 feet long, and they
Yep.
seem to be aggressive and even breach with some consistency.
That's where we tagged all of these fish, and we were up there last year and we caught 350 in one day. They're very concentrated up there. We do get reports of people catching them, and then we just ask that you put them back as soon as you can. I think it's as our population grows, that's like one of the good things and one of the bad things is like there's going to be more people catching them. People obviously fishing for striped bass, river herring are going to catch them, and I mean that's kind of the way it goes. So we just ask like you just put it back, and as fast as you can. Um, So to kind of go back, we detected 30% of our fish. We have this population estimate of now, 72,000 fish. And if you do the quick math, that means like 20,000 short nose maybe migrating to the near Carver every year. And some of them staying for long periods of time. But as I mentioned with the Atlantic sturgeon, if you were a migrant to the near harbor, you are most likely going to migrate there next year. So it's repeatable, and I'm not sure if this happens with other species of fish, but it seems like it's happening with our sturgeon. Is that whatever behavior you do, that's like the behavior you are going to do over many years. Which to me means that maybe there's a little subpopulation of short nose, right? So the harbor migrants, for fish like short nose that spend lots of time in freshwater, moving to saltwater is a physiological change. My guess it's, probably a little bit more it could be more physiologically exhausting for them, or it could be something that they're doing for a reason, right? There's more food in the harbor. So we are now this year going to look at the genetic and behavior and gene expression of the fish that use the harbor versus ones that don't. Is if they are a subpopulation, then I think that even more says to the fact that we need to protect them. Because if we lose that genetic variability of these fish that use the harbor, our population, we'd be losing like a part of our population. So, this is pretty cool stuff. Is that you go to the harbor, you're going to go to the harbor, all the time. So, I mentioned it not being like a great place to work. There's lots of vessel traffic, just lots happening in general, right? There's lots of large ships moving in, um, extensive, marine construction that's happening, high volumes of commercial and recreational traffic. and that's a hub for future offshore wind development. That's we're bringing in cables into the Hudson. So it's a busy place, and we don't know if it's good or bad. Uh, so overall, we hope that the information we generate, helps improve conservation outcomes. And in the Hudson, we're obviously seeing some positive signs, but we don't know if there are serious threats that continue, and there's new threats on the horizon. Ultimately, our science can help enable conservation, but the decisions that society makes in the coming years are likely to have impacts on our future of our sturgeon. They've been around since the time of the dinosaurs. They've survived meteor impacts, ice ages, and lots of other changes. Uh, and most wild populations around the world are really struggling to coexist with humans. So populations of Atlantic and short-nosed and Hudson appear to be doing better than most, but there's still challenges and vulnerabilities that exist. So the next is going to be the video of our sampling that we do in High Park for adult Atlantics. So this is taken with a drone. We catch fish with gill net, which you can see is in the gray bucket as it comes around. There's like a gray garbage can. You can see the net kind of hanging out of it. I'm holding some of the net there. So this is a large female that's over the side. We put couple straps around her and then lift her into the boat onto the floor. And then we lift her into the onboard holding tank that will hold her in, which has oxygen, fresh water going into it, and oxygen going into it. So we hold them there until we're ready to process them. We only put a handful of fish in that tank. So you're going to see the crew is going to be processing the fish. I think they might be measuring it here. So they're also going to scan it they're measuring it. They're also going to scan it for a PIT tag, which is a passive integrated transponder tag. You're going to see a green unit that Wes is holding there and kind of swiping along the fish. It's like the microchip you put in your dog and cat. It allows us to know, have we caught the fish before? If it doesn't have a tag, we put one in it. Now we're putting it in the sling, and we measure it or weigh it. I'm sorry, weigh the fish, and then we let it go. We've been doing this survey since 2006. This is a newer boat, which is much more equipped to capture and hold fish. So the fish that are in the tank are floating upside down. They're completely happy. That's how we want them to be. If they roll over on their stomach, they usually start kind of thrashing. But you can see the one fish that's laying there in the upper part of the tank, its gills are moving really strong. That's like best case scenarios when the fish is kind of just hanging out on their back. Strong gill movement, and you can see the fish swim right off. Like you don't even see them on the surface. So that's all I have. If anyone has any questions, happy to answer them.
Oh, so there is a question. Thank you so much, Amanda. That was terrific. We're right at time. There's one question here. Are you concerned about the cables going in for the offshore wind disturbing sturgeon habitat significantly?
So, the state, like I mentioned before, the state of New York permits all of those projects. The permit people work very closely with us. Like I said before, New York is really good about like making sure that stuff doesn't happen when the fish are there, protecting habitat, and if they do disturb habitat, which they are and do, they need to do a mitigation project. So Empire Wind, which is one of the wind cables that's coming in, is doing a $1 million project that's working with sturgeon. tagging fish, learning more about their movement. So their projects directly conserve and help us learn more about sturgeon. I think New York might be one of the only states that has this like mitigation fund that makes kind of permits that people do these projects that help conserve. Because the reality is is that things are going to happen, especially stuff like offshore wind, green energy. That stuff's going to happen if we can keep the projects going and then learn more about the fish. I think that's like best case scenario. A lot of times, um, the projects, like I said, are going to happen anyway. So there's a large project that's happening. I'm not sure what wind farm, but NYSERDA is in charge, and it's a large project that NYSERDA is going to be managing, and they're tagging 300 sturgeon in the course of a couple years, and also monitoring movement with these receivers. So, I mean, can like I feel like anytime we disturb the bottom, it not only affects sturgeon but other species. But I think we do the best we can to try to uh, mitigate the best we can.
Thanks again, Amanda. This was really great. The chat is blowing up with gratitude for an excellent, engaging talk, great science, terrific comments. So thank you. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. We hope to see you again next month and in March. So February 19th and March 19th will be our next speakers. Again, thank you, Amanda, and good night, everyone.